The Dream Master by Roger Zelazny. So this book was copyright 1966, but it was originally a novella that came out a couple years before called He Who Shapes, and it co-won a Nebula Award for Best Novella with Brian Aldiss's The Saliva Tree. I also have this later print here from Ace with some different artwork that has to do with this dog that shows up in the story. And this was a fairly challenging read. Everything I've read from Roger Zelazny so far has been challenging. This was the third novel. The first novel I read was This Immortal, and that was challenging for other reasons. And then the second book I read was called Lord of Light. This is probably one of his most famous besides the Chronicles of Amber, and I co-read this with Chris from Liminal Spaces. And we both liked this quite a bit, but he had recently read The Dream Master, and he did a video on his channel. It really blew his channel up. It's his most popular video. And I was already kind of on the lookout for Zelazny, but after seeing Chris's original video, it really made me want to track this book down. And when we were discussing Lord of the Light, he gave me a couple kind of homework assignments. He says, before you read this, there's a couple things to look up. And I'll post it down in the description because I probably won't pronounce this completely right. But he says, look up The Lady of Shalott, not Shalott, but Shalott, and Tristan and Iseult, or Iseulte, something like that. So like I said, I'll post it down there. And so I just went to Wikipedia. I read up on these kind of fables a little bit and watched a YouTube video or two and kind of to prepare myself. So we'll get to that in a minute. I think it's great advice to buff up on that a little bit before you read this one. It'll make a lot of sense. And then later on in the end of the video, I'm going to talk about Chris's deep dive video. It's about an hour and 15-minute video he did on it. And it really changed my outlook on this one because I got to admit, when I finished this one, I wasn't quite sure what to think. And then I watched his video and man, it really opened up some things I definitely missed. So we'll get to that towards the end, but this will be spoiler free. So I'm kind of want to encourage people to read it. I think buffing up on some of these things beforehand and then watching Chris's video afterwards will give you a little bit more appreciation for this. So let's get into what this book is about. So we're in a near future Earth. The setting is very familiar, so that part of this book was not a challenge. And humanity has got a lot of technical advances since the 60s when this was written. They have self-driving cars, and a lot of other technology that has eliminated some sickness and death, and not completely death, but it's prolonged people's lives, and not as many people are going hungry. It seems like everybody's needs are finally getting met. But there's some psychological issues that are cropping up due to overpopulation and people kind of losing some of their ambition in a way. And so our main character, his name is Charles Render, and he is a neuroparticipant therapist. And they call him Shapers, and that's a lot easier to say. And what this involves is he's like a psychologist and he brings a patient into his office. He has this device that looks like an egg that the patient goes in. And then he sits at a console. And this book cover here is a good representation of this part of it. And his hand is kind of in this sling so it can kind of move freely. And it hovers over these buttons and it's kind of pressing a lot of these buttons through his subconscious in a way. He's entering a dream state with the patient. They're both inside of this hallucinatory dream at the same time. Yet he really needs to keep control of the situation. He can't let the patient override anything that he's doing in this dream state, or some really bad things can happen. He's trained to do this. He's one of the best in the world. And this is what he does. And there's been a lot of suicides. There's a lot of self-harm going on. There's a lot of these psychological issues that people are having. And his job is very valuable. So our main character, Render, has had a couple traumas in his life. He lost his wife and daughter, and this has kind of helped him create these barriers for when he goes into these dream sequences. And in the beginning of the book, there's a couple therapy sessions that he does that kind of orient you on how this works. And it also does some fascinating world building of some of the issues that people are having in this day and age. And so he is kind of going about his job. Everything's kind of, normal. And he gets approached by someone who wants to come along and kind of become one of these shapers as well. The problem is she's blind, and her name is Eileen Shalott. And this is the first clue. When Chris said, read The Lady of Shalott, I figured right away this was who this had to do with. So you can connect those pieces really easy. And if you read up on The Lady of Shalott and then see how she's described in this story, it makes a lot of sense. And it was pretty cool to have that connection kind of ahead of time. I never would have known about that if Chris wouldn't have told me. And so he is approached by her and he's saying, you're blind, you can't do this. You have to go into these dream states and describe things and manifest them with your mind, and you've never seen anything. She was born blind. She convinces him to give it a try, and he's kind of attracted to her. Even though he lost his wife, he has a girlfriend, so this kind of creates a bit of a love triangle between these three. But he ends up helping her and taking her on, and he's going to try to train her to be a shaper, even though she was born blind and can't see anything. So that's kind of the main setup of the story. There's a lot of things that go on. There's a lot of psychology and philosophy and these dream sequences when the shaper are shaping these dream worlds are really done really well. They're vivid. It's a very hard thing to describe, and Zelazny does an amazing job with that part. We get some interaction with him and his son. He's very protective about his son. I really liked his son. He was kind of a smart ass and witty for his young age. But I could have read a lot more about his son, but he kind of shows up here and there in the story. And then the other thing that shows up is this dog. And so Eileen, she has this kind of genetically modified dog where they modify their intelligence fairly high. The dog can talk, it can do some things, and it is very protective of Eileen. She's blind, so he's kind of a seeing eye dog for her. His name is Sigmund, and he's a very interesting character. I think everybody that I've heard talk about this book or read anything about it, everybody wants more of Sigmund because he's a very fascinating creature. He's still a little primal. He goes out and does some hunting and some things, but just a very fascinating creature, and he plays a pretty key role kind of throughout the novel. But the rest of this short novel, this novel is only like 150 some pages. It's really our main character Render and this girl Eileen kind of going through this process, and right away, the first session she goes in, she kind of oversteps some boundaries, and Render is always kind of trying to keep her in line because she seems to be very good at controlling these dreams. Now, you read through, you get to the end. The book in general can be very disorienting. There's times where you just go into one of these dream sequences. You're not warned, or you go inside the point of view of other characters, and it can be a very challenging thing to figure out what's going on. You just kind of have to keep reading, and eventually it'll sort of make sense. But I got to the end, and I pretty much understood everything that went on, or I thought I did. And I was just kind of a little overwhelmed. I was waiting for something a little bit bigger. And then I watched Chris's deep dive video on this, his deep read, and he did a great job. If you read this book and you're confused, you got to watch this video, carve some time out for it. A lot of the first 75% of the story all made sense to me, but it's at the end where it kind of connects to this story, Tristan and Iseult, where he took his reading to another level and he really puzzled out the ending, and I would say theorize. I would almost have to reread and see if it completely matches up, but he came up with some ideas towards the end that really make the novel pay off for the finale, and it really elevated my overall thoughts. I was thinking this was somewhere in the 3-star range, and then after watching his video and then thinking about it, it's definitely a 4-star read. I don't know if I love it quite as much as Chris, but it was fascinating, and it just shows you what a complex, deep writer Zelazny is. I mean, he was definitely an intellectual, very, very well read, and the way he could weave these old ancient fables and myths into science fiction, it's just a whole nother level. I think you could read most of his stuff without having the background on some of these fables and still enjoy it, but it just adds a whole nother level, and I really appreciate Chris pointing that stuff out because I would have completely lost it. So that's going to do it for that one. My next Zelazny read is probably going to be 4 for tomorrow. This is 4 little kind of short stories or novellas. I have read one in here, The Rose for Ecclesiastes, but I've kind of been going in chronological order for his writing. So that's kind of the plan. I've started at the beginning, and I'm going to see how far I can get through his catalog of work. So, let me know if you've read The Dream Master or if you plan to. Hopefully these tips that Chris gave to me work for you. And like I said, go watch his deep dive video at the end, and it should hopefully make a lot more sense like it did for me. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.